Thanks again to the Albuquerque Poet Laureate Ana C. Martinez. You can watch our full 40-minute interview that includes a rendition of Ms. Martinez's poem, Don't Be Nice. It was really cool. That's online right now on our New Mexico in Focus Facebook and YouTube pages. All right, last subject. The U.S. Forest Service says its ban on prescribed burns is over after 3 months. The program was put on hold in late May after the devastating Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon wildfire, which started with the action from the federal government. The Forest Service says there are new protocols in place to make sure there aren't any more disasters like that historic fire. We'll get into some of the specific procedural changes in a moment, but from what you all have read about the end of this ban, Julianne, I'll start with you. Is this the right time as the weather starts to change a little bit?
I think the Forest Service took a relatively short amount of time between pausing prescribed burns because of this catastrophe and resuming them. Considering how long the agency takes to make most of its decisions, that's really just a little flash in the pan. And I think it's important to note that allegedly they're going to have some same day decision making that goes hand in hand with their planning processes. But I think that, those who make the argument that the agency has really lost credibility over time, I think that argument is very strong among people in northern New Mexico, especially, although certainly folks who live around the Gila and other, Ruidoso, places that have also had big fire. But this fire in northern New Mexico that was caused by the Forest Service, we have to remember it wasn't just a prescribed burn that began on a windy day. It was also a slash pile that was left burning over the winter that flared up again. So the complexity of how these things can get out of hand, I think people are right to be fairly skeptical. But at the same time, I think it would be dangerous for the Forest Service to just stop these efforts to improve forest health, because our nation has let our forest get to the point where things are very, very dangerous.
I'm glad you brought that up. Ed, the Forest Service Chief, Randy Moore, says the agency is not going to back away from intentional burns, as Julianne just mentioned. He says he sees them as a crucial tool in reducing the buildup of fire fuel material for forest floors and grasslands. No one would disagree with that, right? It's the how. It's not the reason to do it. It's the how to do it. That's the problem here. Are you feeling that these guys have gotten on top of it at this point?
Let me just put this out there. I read a statement by the fire chief, Moore, that just jumped out at me. And he said, well, I can't guarantee that a fire isn't going to get out of control in the future. That concerned me, okay? These are prescribed burns. These are intentional. And I know there are a lot of things that you can't control. I would like to hear from that chief to say, we are going to do everything that we need to do so that this doesn't happen. But to already set this up as well, if it happens, and I see the data, some of the data in the report said that 99.8% of the prescribed burns are, happen with success and no other problems. But when you look at the 500 square miles and the destruction of property and lives, as a citizen, I want to hear we are doing everything so that this doesn't happen again, period, without the caveat that we're not going to guarantee, because that's opening it up to human failure. And we just can't accept that. We can't allow that to happen again. We need to take the requisite steps, even if it's overdoing it, to ensure this doesn't happen again. And that would be, my concern as a citizen. How do we make this 100%? Is there any way to do it? Well, that would be the ultimate goal without that caveat.
Dave, interestingly, one of the interesting changes will account for weather anomalies that can creep up in a matter of days in New Mexico, of course. Now, under this new guidance, plans to start prescribed burns will only be effective for 24 hours, not weeks or months. That's interesting. That's the way it was before. That seems like a common sense change, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, and I think that, the use of that term, common sense, is one that I think that, the federal government, especially in a state like New Mexico, California, these large states all over the West, they have a lot of power, and they do have, are given a mission to protect forests, to do what's right. And the thing is, too, and I would say, do we know really about what the criteria are for starting a burn or stopping a burn, or how the Forest Service works? And I mean, as evidenced by the 100-page report that was put out that all of us studied, I mean, I studied it for days, right? I'm being facetious. Of course, very few of us read it, but I think that we have to understand, and we don't understand, what are the roles that these areas, that these, departments have, and how can we as, individuals influence what their decision making is like? And we don't seem to know how to do that.
Interesting point there. Interestingly, in the case of the burn that became the Hermit's Peak fire, an administrator, Julianne, I want to go to you on this, signed off on the burn on March 24th to occur between April 1st and April 30th. So crews ignited on April 6th. And that's going to change to day of, certainly, but in my gut, it's just like, does that really make a huge difference? I'm not a fire expert, I'm not trying to be, but something doesn't seem quite together here. How do you make that part of it out in your own mind?
I mean, what I said before about the timelines, that the Forest Service has, I think it's interesting to consider another little piece of this puzzle, which is something called the Santa Fe Forest Mountain Landscape Resiliency Project. I may have added an extra word in there, but this is a federal, state, and private land planning effort that was going to impose prescribed burns on tens of thousands of acres north and east of Santa Fe.
Right.
And of course, this was in the final review process. It's been a years-long review process. We've written lots of stories about it. And I think I know that the pause in the federal prescribed burns also hit the pause button on the planning effort for that. And so we have this years and years of debate in the community, and certainly in Santa Fe, there is not agreement about prescribed burns and the value of that tool. There is a large vocal group that really feels like that is not the way to go.
Yeah.
And so, this is a tricky topic, and I don't know that the Forest Service really does have, the answer.
Ed, you mentioned the governor previously, and I love the quote from her spokesperson, which we can assume is what the governor feels. Quote, "We hope the Forest Service understands that it will take actions, not just words, to earn back the trust of New Mexicans." That's pretty stiff stuff from a governor towards the federal government, but is she on solid ground there?
Well, when you see the devastation that happened to the lives of individuals who depend on government, who depend on the federal government, on the Forest Service, the state government, on BLM and all those people who are responsible for their lands, and when it gets out of control this way, their livelihood often is lost. There are a lot of people, individuals out there who are still trying to recover and may never recover. So, as the leader of our state, to make such a strong statement, I think is appropriate. We can't let this happen again. These are intentional prescribed burns. This cannot happen again. Now, I don't know where the fire chief is from. I don't know if he works out of Washington, D.C. But when you're here in this state, and you care about what happens in the state, and you want to make sure that you do everything and hold those accountable who are responsible for those decisions that might impact their lives.
Dave, it's hard for a federal agency to sort of filter down its plans and goals and ideals down to the public. I mean, has anybody even heard what the Forest Service had to say about this? But you know what I mean? I'm sure they understand where the governor's coming from on this. Right. Should we just all be there and just not trust these people at all at this point and just let them prove a point?
Well, I mean, that would certainly be my reaction at this point. I mean, if the Forest Service says, "Yeah, we're going to reschedule, and we're going to start to schedule, some burns," I would say run. I mean, that's what the evidence tells us. And but I do think that the other question that is going to have to be answered is, if we are facing climate change, it's going to affect things like prescribed burns. It's going to affect the density of forests and, all sorts of things that a layman like me probably won't understand. It's going to affect our water. What is the federal government, as the planning agency or the agency in charge of these things, what are they doing? What are they planning? we seem to spend all of our time fighting about strange things that don't seem to make much sense. We are facing some very serious problems, and do we have the talent and the ability and the communication skills to sort of overcome them? That's the question that I would have.
That's a good point there. Hey, thanks again to our line panel, as always, this week. Now, be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. Good stuff this week for sure. And catch up on any episodes you might have missed on the PBS Video app on your Roku or Smart TV. Now, before we go, the State Fair is in Albuquerque, and of course that means food, fun, and rides for the family, but it also means it's Navy Week here in the city. Senior producer Lou DeVizio sat down with 3 members of the Navy, an officer who serves on the USS Santa Fe, a lieutenant on the USS New Mexico, and a rear admiral. Now, Lou wanted to find out more about their ties to our state, which are many, and why the Navy chose to stop in Albuquerque of all places.